Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Sonia Gray, and this is From the South, the daily news brief from Tell Us Your English. And we start this new edition right now. Thank you for joining us. We begin in Venezuela, where President Nicolas Maduro says a terrorist group dismantled on Monday was part of a wider conspiracy with plans to explode a bomb on the embassy of an allied country in Caracas. 2 policemen and several members of the armed cell were killed in the operation outside Caracas.
Unfortunately, we had 2 young policemen killed while they were resting and waiting for these terrorists to give themselves up. They were shot in the head, both of them. And they also left 6 Bolivarian policemen seriously wounded who are fighting for their lives. So the commando groups had to take action, and they defeated one part of the terrorist group and arrested more than 5 who have given their testimony and told everything.
5 members of what Maduro called the terrorist cell were arrested in the shootout, which lasted several hours. It is still not clear what happened to the former police helicopter pilot, Oscar Perez, who was apparently the leader of the group. Perez had stolen a helicopter last year and dropped grenades on government buildings. After 6 months on the run, the police tracked him and his associates down to a house on the hillside of the neighborhood of El Junquito. Our correspondent in Caracas, Freddie Gillingham, has more on that operation.
To bring you the latest updates on quite a major story that was happening here in Venezuela yesterday. In the early hours of Monday morning, quite a large presence of security forces descended on a neighborhood in Junquito, just outside of Caracas. Massive gunfire was reported. Various social media videos showed that. It is believed that a terrorist cell belonging to the former Venezuelan helicopter pilot Oscar Perez has been neutralized. Multiple deaths have been reported. However, the fate of Oscar Perez is yet to be confirmed. Just to give you a bit of background information on Oscar Perez, he was facing terrorist charges for most infamously launching a attack against government buildings at the height of last summer's anti-government protests. In that attack, he stole a helicopter and fired grenade launchers at various government buildings. Aside from other incidents, he appeared in a video in December where he reportedly had taken over an army barracks. So this was seriously an individual who had real intentions. It's quite a bizarre end to what has been quite a bizarre saga, but that's all we can bring you now in Caracas.
We thank Freddie for that report. President Maduro made those comments at the end of his annual address to the nation, delivered before the National Constituent Assembly. The address focused on messages of peace and respect, with the president saying he desires a debate of ideas and tolerance, and adding that the Constituent Assembly is an opportunity to reinvent the revolution.
So 2007 is also marked as a heroic year. The year in which awareness returned, the majority strength of the revolution returned in the course of the struggles, in the course of the difficulties. A true revolution shows its reasons for being if it's able to confront the worst difficulties, the most difficult tests, and to overcome those.
The Venezuelan Popular Assemblies are continuing their debates towards building the Bolivarian government's plan for the years 2019 to 2025. More details in this report.
The Ali Park in Caracas is the main location where environmental and eco-socialist movements are debating the future government plan to continue the Bolivarian revolution in Venezuela.
We are not only debating on the government's administration plan, we are writing a plan for the transformation of our homeland. And it is crucial to incorporate people in this, because in order to construct a successful government program, we need the voice, the will, and the proposals of the Bolivarian Chavist and revolutionary people who want a better future for all of us.
One of the main points of debate is the historic fifth objective proposed by former President Hugo Chavez, which sought to preserve life on the planet through an eco-socialist productive model.
In this new community planning process, we cannot hide that some objectives from the first socialist plan were not fulfilled, and we need to discuss it and analyze it, especially the fifth objective, which focused on life preservation on the planet. We are committed to environmental movements to achieve and promote this objective.
There are activists who propose to establish environmental courts, water protection committees, and waste educational programs. The exploitation of the mining arc of the Orinoco is still under discussion.
It is looking at extractivism as a way to ensure the continuity of the revolution. If the empire defeats our revolution, Mother Earth will be destroyed. President Maduro is the one who signed the mining arc decree, which represents 10% of the national territory. Last year, he signed the Cara National Park decree, which protects 8% of the territory. And all the gold, oil, coltan, and diamonds that are underneath the protected territory will be never exploited. It is the second biggest national park in the world and the greatest oxygen reservoir of the planet.
In only 8 days, around 2 million people have participated in the community assemblies.
Pope Francis has celebrated the first Mass of his visit to Chile at O'Higgins Park in Chile's capital, Santiago. In his homily, Francis called for the defense of indigenous communities, although he made no specific mention of the Mapuche people who is scheduled to meet later this week. The Pope also praised the strength of the Chilean people.
How much the heart of the Chilean people knows about rebuilding and starting anew. How much you know about getting up again after so many falls.
And earlier in the day, Chile's President Michelle Bachelet welcomed the pontiff to the Moneda Palace. She said that his visit would allow different political and social groups to open a dialogue and also allow the country to address new challenges regarding conflicts with the Mapuche community and the fight against inequality.
His visit is good for us. It allows us to stop our rapid speed to look at the others, look forward, listen, dialogue, reflect about who we are, about what we do. Even if we are Chileans or not, brothers from the same faith or not, everyone is welcome to participate in this meeting, in this dialogue, and we will learn from him and from the dialogue he is promoting.
And at their meeting at the Moneda Palace, Pope Francis apologized for the sexual abuse of minors by Catholic priests in Chile.
I want to express the pain and shame that I feel for the irreparable damage done to young children by ministers of the Church.
But as the Pope arrived in Chile on Monday evening, protesters dressed as nuns denounced the high cost of the visit and the Chilean Church's involvement in these sexual abuse scandals. The Catholic Church popularity in Chile is the lowest in Latin America, and many see it as a pillar of the conservative establishment.
Pope Francis, who said there will be zero tolerance in sex abuse case in the church, named Bishop Juan Barros, who had been accused of covering up the biggest pedophile of the Chilean church history, and following the reaction and rejection from the community and from the clergy, he called us idiots.
We are here because we are interested in the Pope's visit. We firmly believe that he is an historical character in the history of our Catholic popes. We are very happy for him to be among us. We also believe that this is a huge opportunity to tell him what's happening in our church with our hierarchy, which each day identifies itself more with power and less with the poor.
A Chilean court put Mapuche leader Francisco Lincoln under house arrest just days ahead of Pope Francis's visit. The Mapuche leader had voiced hopes of meeting with Pope Francis during his visit to the Araucania region, saying she wanted to let him know about the plight of the indigenous people. Lincoln is one of the 11 Mapuche community members acquitted for a 2013 double homicide. She fled to Bolivia in search of asylum, as Chile's Court of Appeal has now ordered a retrial of that case.
What they are saying is a lie. The police planted a weapon in my house. I tell you this with all sincerity. I don't like to lie. There wasn't any meeting in my house.
And preparations for Pope Francis's arrival in Peru are underway. Security officials conducted simulated emergency exercises at the Pope's outdoor mass location. They've also organized motorcades that will escort the Pope mobile as it drives through the streets of Lima. Pope Francis will arrive in the capital city on January 18th, and he will also visit Puerto Maldonado and Trujillo. And we'll be back very soon, so stay with us. This Tuesday marks 2 years of the arbitrary detention of Argentina's social leader, Milagro Sala. In the next report, we will analyze the reasons behind her detention.
In the framework of the fierce persecution that was driven by Governor Gerardo Morales against Milagro Sala, different judicial charges were made against her. The deputy Juan Manuel Esquivel explained to us one of the reasons behind the harassment against the leader.
With Milagro as a deputy of the province, the classical two-party system breaks. The political tension increased a lot. Agreements of the Peronistic radical group are broken, and she begins to be an unbalancing factor within the political life of this province. We remember, for example, the time when legislators intended to increase their salary, and she constantly denounced this.
The relationship between Morales and President Mauricio Macri with construction businessmen also helps us to understand her arrest, qualified as arbitrary by different international human rights organizations.
In the last decade, thousands of cooperative members who were in the 1990s unemployed built 100,000 social houses in Argentina. It's not a coincidence that one of the first measures that Macri took was to shut down the cooperatives' housing plans, and that was also one of the reasons for which Sala was imprisoned. Today, social housing is not being built, and the few houses that are being built are by Macri's friends and the old contractors of the country.
The sugar businessman Carlos Pedro Blaquier was accused of being one of the civil accomplices of the military dictatorship. The role of social organizations for the judiciary to investigate him was key in the history of the province.
He's the main character of this history, because Blaquier is the one who has pressed to put limits to Tupac Amaru, to arrest Milagro as soon as the government changed, because Milagro clearly stated their responsibility in the dictatorship crimes and the current workers' exploitation.
These are the keys to understanding why Milagro Sala is considered a political prisoner and why on the second anniversary of her detention there will be more demands of her immediate freedom.
The Argentine government has created a commission to investigate the disappearance of the submarine Ara San Juan on November 15, 2017. The commission will be responsible for investigating the reasons for the disappearance of the submarine, which had 44 crew members on board. It will also request testimonies from public officials and examine the involvement of the Argentine Navy and defense authorities on the rescue operations. Ecuador's electoral court has ruled that Lenin Moreno remains the president of the ruling party Alianza País. Several members of the directorate asked to have him removed because of political differences within the leaders of the Citizens' Revolution of former President Rafael Correa. After the ruling, Correa supporters announced that they will form a new party called Citizen Revolution. And former President Correa responded on social media to the division in the Alianza País party. On Twitter, Correa wrote today, on the 11th anniversary of the Citizens' Revolution, the gift of the traitors is to steal Alianza País with an unprecedented and divided ruling by the TCE. They can take away Alianza País, but they can never take away our will and our convictions. Despite the pain, this only makes us stronger. Hasta la victoria siempre. Guatemalan President Jimmy Morales has completed his second year amidst complaints he hasn't fulfilled his campaign promises. On Sunday, he delivered his annual report while facing protests and questions.
Police and military surrounded Congress as President Jimmy Morales delivered the second government report of his presidency. Security forces did not allow protesters inside the building to express their dissatisfaction with this government. The demonstrators blamed the government for political crisis and tragedies like the fire at a state-run orphanage.
We can't feed our children. Salaries are too low. We face violence and instability. The girls from the safe home were burned alive, 51 of them, and he's spending millions on marketing. It's just not fair.
The scene inside Congress was the complete opposite. President Morales presented his report without facing any opposition. He claimed Guatemala has thrived thanks to the order he established.
I want to remind all of you that the country we received was in disastrous conditions. We needed to clean house in financial, administrative, and political matters. We achieved this thanks to the order established in 2016, and we saw the results over the past year.
President Morales' claims stand in contrast to reality. In the last year, 111 children died from chronic malnutrition. The country's human rights attorney say there has been no major victory facing this pandemic.
Chronic malnutrition is a crucial issue. It's disheartening that children continue to die in Guatemala because there is no food available. Another issue is healthcare, which must be developed so it's available for all citizens.
President Morales kicks off his third year in office facing social pressure and legal battles. His son and brother are facing corruption charges. The president is also awaiting a decision from the Constitutional Court surrounding charges he received bribes from the army.
On Monday, at least 10 workers died in Colombia when a bridge collapsed on the road that connects Bogota with the city of Villavicencio. Another 8 workers suffered injuries from the incident. According to the coordinator for the National Unit for Disaster Risk Management, the bridge collapsed suddenly when there were about 20 workers at the site. The victims, who were welders, were at the lower part of the viaduct, which is located 65 kilometers from the capital. And 31 of the 38 judges who will make up the special peace course in Colombia have been sworn in by President Juan Manuel Santos. The remaining 7 will start their tenure in March.
The Colombian president specified the judges have a vital mission: bring clarity to crimes committed during the armed conflict and those responsible so that they can be judged in a court of law.
You will judge and punish criminal acts committed during or in relation to the armed conflict, not just by guerrillas or state agents, but by civilians who took part in the conflict and may have been active participants in some of the most serious crimes.
The Special Peace Court will start working with a model for transitional justice that looks to find balance between the right for peace and enforcing the law. It's in this balance where a victim's truth usually exists.
A model of justice based on truth, on placing all your cards on the table in order to obtain legal benefits, but even more so, to obtain cultural and symbolic benefits for a society that has yet to turn the page, for a society that is in denial, that resists honoring life by moving forward with the truth.
The judge's first order of business is to establish internal regulations and a bill of criminal procedure under which they will operate. But even if the judges will start work on Monday, they are still waiting for the Constitutional Court to review the regulatory law approved by Congress, since this law imposed obstacles for human rights defenders.
It makes absolutely no sense that human rights defenders would not be allowed to be judges. There aren't more transparent and suitable people for the job, with a higher moral authority to take part in this process to uncover the truth and provide justice than human rights defenders. We know by heart everything the country has undergone.
The start of the court's work is significant for victims since it marks the beginning of an integral system of truth, justice and reparations. Regardless, victims hope that the Constitutional Court will nullify some in-depth changes made to this project, like excluding third parties who had a hand in the armed conflict and all the obstacles put in place for human rights defenders.
And we'll be back very soon, so stay with us. Welcome back. Hundreds of people have marched in front of U.S. President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in Palm Beach against his offensive definition of Haiti, El Salvador, and African countries on Monday. Several demonstrators were Haitians living in the United States, holding Haitian flags and signs. Trump was spending the day, also Martin Luther King Jr. Day, at his West Palm Beach golf resort. Across the street from the demonstrators, a group of Trump supporters also convened to see the president's passing motorcade. And Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy announced on Monday that Madrid will continue to run Catalonia's government if the former leader Carles Puigdemont is voted regional president by the Catalan parliament. Carles Puigdemont party won the most votes on Monday 21st regional elections. Among the separatist parties, which came together to have a slim majority over pro-unity parties, Puigdemont supporters argue that voters have elected him and he should be able to rule from Brussels. And just hours ahead of the Catalan Parliament swearing-in ceremony, independent supporters are calling for large protests to demand the freedom of its political leaders. Our correspondent, Joanna Ortiz, has more.
We are reporting from Barcelona at a time when we still don't know who will preside over the Catalan parliament. It is the second most important position in Catalonia, and it will be especially controversial in the next legislative term. This after there's less than 24 hours to form the new parliament that was elected on December 21st. This position is controversial since the swearing-in of Carles Puigdemont is still on hold, and if it does happen, it will be done without his presence. The rules of the parliament will need to be revised to see if such a swearing-in could be possible. The government has already said this could not be possible and has even made two threats. Firstly, if the swearing goes ahead, then Article 155 would continue to exist. And secondly, there would be consequences to those who support and allow this swearing-in. Meanwhile, citizens haven't forgotten that this Tuesday makes it 3 months since Jordi Sanchez and Jordi Cuixart were arrested. This is the reason why there are protesters across Catalonia and here in Barcelona. They will gather from 5 different communities and will march to demand their release and reject the actions of the Spanish government. They also call for a march outside the parliament when the swearing-in is scheduled to take place to support the pro-independence parties.
We thank Joanna Ortiz for that report, and now let's have a look at some of the other news making headlines from around the world.
Clashes between protesters and police forces in Greece amid anti-austerity demonstrations have taken place in Athens. Protesters threw stones and pieces of marble at police officers who deployed tear gas to disperse the crowd. Demonstrators are marching against austerity measures due to be voted on next week. Unions say that the changes to the 36-year-old industrial action law is only the first step in ongoing EU-IMF efforts to limit strikes. Bangladesh has agreed to a time frame with Myanmar for repatriating hundreds of thousands of Rohingya who fled an army crackdown last year. Myanmar has agreed to accept 1,500 Rohingya every week and that it aims to return all of them to Myanmar within 2 years. Over 650,000 Rohingya have fled to neighboring Bangladesh since violence erupted in Rakhine state in August. At least 14 students and a teacher were injured after a knife fight broke out in a school in the Russian city of Perm. The victims were slashed when they tried to separate 2 teenage boys who were fighting. 2 suspects were detained by police and the incident is being treated as attempted murder. The teacher and a 16-year-old are in hospital with serious neck wounds.
2 guys in masks ran into the classroom, slashed the teacher, and started slashing the children. Then one of them ran away and jumped from the 2nd floor. The second was running around, slashing others, and then himself.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has arrived in India for a 6-day visit with the intention of strengthening bilateral relations. But hundreds of protesters in the capital city of New Delhi have denounced his visit and organized a pro-Palestinian march.
Israel is a symbol of promoting violence and war, and it's a big arms seller in the world. So what we are considering that India as a country who is a peace lover country, that is a peace lover country, so we cannot make friend to Israel.
The Philippines' most active volcano, Mayon, on the island of Luzon, has begun erupting, forcing thousands to flee the island. More than 12,000 people have been ordered to leave a 7-kilometer danger zone around the crater as officials warned them of potentially destructive mud flows and toxic clouds.
On January 16, 1991, President George H.W. Bush announced the start of Operation Desert Storm, a military operation to expel occupying Iraqi forces from Kuwait, also known as the First Gulf War. Let's find out what led to the Gulf War and how it ended.
It was in the summer of 1990 when Iraq's President Saddam Hussein ordered a military invasion of Kuwait, its southern neighbor, accusing the Gulf monarchy of stealing oil from the Rumaila oil field on the Iraq-Kuwait border and oil overproduction that pushed down the prices to the disadvantage of other oil-producing countries like Iraq. Almost unanimous international condemnation of the invasion followed. The Soviet Union and China placed an arms embargo on Iraq, while the UN Security Council passed 12 resolutions demanding immediate withdrawal of Iraqi forces from Kuwait, but Saddam Hussein ignored all of it. A US-led coalition of 24 nations then responded by launching a military operation called Operation Desert Storm. On 17 January 1991, it began airstrikes against Baghdad. After 5 weeks and more than 100 airstrikes, coalition ground troops retook Kuwait and drove Saddam's forces back into Iraq. The war for Kuwait began a new chapter in modern warfare and a new media approach to war reporting. For the first time, a conflict was covered as it happened. TV viewers were presented with a spectacle of bombs exploding and fighter jets taking off from remote aircraft carriers, but with little or no human context. The first Gulf War was the biggest U.S. military action in the Middle East since World War II, although it lasted only several days. 12 years later, in 2003, another Gulf War began, with another United States-led coalition invading Iraq and overthrowing the government of Saddam Hussein. It led to deep instability in the region and around the world.
And we end with some breaking news from Venezuela. The Interior Minister has just confirmed the death of the former police pilot, Oscar Perez. Perez was allegedly the leader of an armed group involved in a shootout with the police on Monday. 2 policemen were killed and 6 wounded in the operation on Monday, and we'll bring you more details in our next newscast. And with that, we've come to the end of this daily news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.